So the storm before the voice, that's kind of what this next chapter is about. So 37 is also Elihu's final speech. It's his final moment, and it's dramatic. The tone even rises further. The imagery intensifies, and Elihu moves from explaining God's justice to exalting God's majesty, especially through the power of the storm. So what's powerful here, though, is that this is the moment the storm arrives. Elihu's words echo thunder and lightning, and as his voice fades, God himself will speak next. And so this chapter helps prepare our hearts for that moment. It's not just about awe, it's about humility, reverence, and readiness. So knowing this, let's read chapter 37. At this my heart pounds and leaps from its place. Listen, listen to the roar of his voice, to the rumbling that comes from his mouth. He unleashes his lightning beneath the whole heaven and sends it to the ends of the earth. After he comes the sound of his roar, he thunders with his majestic voice. When his voice resounds, he holds nothing back. God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. He does great things beyond our understanding. He says to the snow, fall on the earth, and to the rain shower, be a mighty downpour, so that all men he has made may know his work. He stops every man from his labor. The animals take cover. They remain in their dens. The tempest comes out from its chamber. The cold from the driving winds. The breath of God produces ice, and the broad waters become frozen. He loads the clouds with moisture. He scatters his lightning through them. At his direction they swirl around over the face of the whole earth to do whatever he commands them. He brings the clouds to punish men, or to water his earth and show his love. Listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonders. Do you know how God controls the clouds and make his lightning flash? Do you know how the clouds hang poised? These wonders of him who is perfect in knowledge, you who swelter in your clothes when the land lies hushed under the south wind, can you join him in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror or of cast bronze? Tell us what we should say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of our darkness. Should he be told that I want to speak? Would any man ask to be swallowed up? Now no one can look at the sun, bright as it is in the skies, after the wind has swept them clean. Out of the north he comes in golden splendor. God comes in awesome majesty. The Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power. In his justice and great righteousness he does not oppress. Therefore men revere him. For does he not have regard for all the wise in heart? So, let's look at that chapter. In verses 1 to 5, Elihu is talking about thunder and awe. In verse 1 he says, at this my heart pounds and leaps from its place. And in verse 5 he says, God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. He does great things beyond our understanding. So Elihu begins with the physical reaction to God's power. He trembles with awe. He compares God's voice to thunder, a force that commands attention. So there's a powerful image in verse 2. He says, listen to the roar of his voice. So God's voice isn't always a whisper. It can roar with power and majesty. And sometimes God doesn't explain himself. He simply shows up with his greatness, and that's enough. So if your heart feels overwhelmed, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's awe. Maybe it's God showing you focus upward. Showing your focus that is upward, So in verses 6 through 13, we see that God's power in the weather. We see God's power in the weather. And in verse 6, he says to the snow, fall on the earth. And in 13, he says, whether the correction of his, or for his land or for love, he brings it. Wow. So Elihu describes how God commands nature. Snow, rain, wind, storms, and how each of these serve as a divine purpose. Powerful image in the snow and the rain, how it obeys God's command, like soldiers obeying a king. Nature isn't random. It responds to the will of the Creator. Sometimes storms correct, sometimes they bless. And if God governs the weather, could he not also govern the seasons of your life? So trust that what seems chaotic in the world or your soul may still be under God's careful control. So, remembering that, verses 14 through 18 is about a call to consider God's wonders. So in verse 14 he says, listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonders. So here Elihu shifts. He tells Job to pause, not argue, not defend, just look and wonder. There's a powerful image. Can you join him in spreading out the skies? So Elihu asks Job a series of rhetorical questions, reminding him how small we are next to God's vast, intricate handiwork. And so worship often begins when words stop, when we just observe and say, God, you are beyond me, but I trust you. And so before you demand answers from God, let yourself be answered by him. Reverence leads to surrender. So verses 19 through 24 is about God, how God is great and he's good. So in verse 23, the Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power. In his justice and great righteousness, he does not oppress. There's the words, he does not oppress. Elihu closes his speech with worship, not accusation. He declares that God is just, even if we don't understand his ways. So God may be beyond our grasp, but he's not beyond our trust. His greatness doesn't cancel out his goodness. God's mystery should lead us to worship, not to suspicion. In terms of confusion, lean into God's justice and righteousness. Even when he feels far, he's never unfair. So, yeah, and then some points to apply, some points of application. Number one, let the storm lead you to worship. Elihu uses the storm to paint a picture of God's power. The same storm that scares us can also draw us to humility and awe. And the storms in your life may not make sense, but they may be preparing your heart for God to speak. Number two, you don't need to understand everything to trust God. Elihu ends not with explanations, but with exaltation. So trust doesn't mean having all the answers. It means believing God's heart even when you don't understand his hand. So get ready. Number three, get ready, for God is about to speak. Job 37 ends with human speeches. The next voice is God himself. So silence your heart, clear the distractions, and prepare your soul. When God speaks, be ready to listen to him. And this also reminds me of when Jesus was with his disciples on the sea, and Jesus went to sleep. He fell asleep, and a storm came, and the disciples were afraid that that the storm would overwhelm them, and so they're saying, Jesus, save us from this storm, and they're so afraid of it, and Jesus is like, haven't I been with you guys this whole time? But Jesus stills quiets the storm with just his voice. He says, "Be still," and the storm stops and is still, and it just shows God's power over the weather. His power over the weather is complete and complete control. So, yeah. So, to encourage us with this chapter, 37 brings us to the edge of something holy. Elihu, for all his flaws, ends his speech by doing what none of the others did. He turns Job's eyes to the majesty of God. And now the thunder grows louder, the skies darkens, and the storm arrives. And so this chapter teaches us that awe is not the enemy of intimacy with God. It's not the enemy of intimacy with God. It's often the beginning of it. And when we're finally quiet, the next voice we hear is God's. So if you're in a season where you feel like you're in the middle of a storm, hold on. Maybe you're not being abandoned. Maybe you're being prepared for something. Because in the very next chapter, God speaks from the storm. So